Alex with us today. We'll be touching on some things we probably haven't considered. As Mr. Kesh said, he does touch on things. Sometimes he's aware of it and sometimes he isn't. But it's very beautiful to hear Alex present and share knowledge with us. And again, it's a very deep knowledge. It's going to take us step by step a while to get everything done, but maybe some of this will be gifted to us, Alex, because we haven't seemed to be able to really put it together, reading the patents, listening to the Knowledge Seekers Workshop. We've made some progress, but as you're well aware, we haven't shown a lot. And that's not to put anyone down, because even the elite scientists of the world have struggled with understanding what Mr. Kesh is trying to bring forward. But Alex has quite a good handle on it as well. So let's let him take over from here, please.
And thank you, Mark. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a beautiful Sunday afternoon in North America. And I want to welcome all the participants from North America. We know exactly where that is on the map. But what we have to understand is that this strength of this meeting actually comes from the foreigners. And I say as a foreigner, that means non-North Americans. The non-North Americans consist of the rest of the world. Hello. So I want to welcome the 6 continents that are coming to this meeting. And we really respect that. So this is the Kesh Foundation Spaceship Institute class of plasma science. We are advancing to basic inner space. The subject today is boundaries. My name is Alexander. I am from Canada. It is August the 1st, 2022. This is the Kesh Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. And as we can see by the medallions here, North America, as we say by the map, includes Canada, US, and the Hispanic community south of the US. So we are carrying on with basic teaching, and after a decade of teaching, we're still in the basics. And we have to do that because we only have a small percentage of the population that is aware of what's going on. So I think the number is around 450 million. But as we're approaching 8 billion people on this planet, we still have a lot of teaching to do. And so we created a, shall we say, yellow brick road here for basic teaching. We started in Brazil in October 14th, 2020. And we went through the teaching, the understanding, the knowing, the insight. And last week we finished the basic Earth Space series. And there's an important point for this, in my opinion, and this is why I've pursued this path. And normally I would go to the intermediate Earth Space series, but in order to understand where we are and to try and pinpoint on the map of existence where we are, we have to clearly identify our Earth space reality, because that is what we tend to, gravitate to. And so where does that leave the inner space? And so this is why we're jumping to the inner space discussion here, because in order for us to understand where we are, we've come to the conclusion that we describe that by understanding our neighbors. And so to understand our neighbors, there has to be a definitive line between us and our neighbors. And so on Earth, we create these boundaries. But do we create these boundaries only on Earth? And so that becomes the question. And by the end of the next series, as you can see here, the potential outline, we will try and pinpoint where exactly this inner space is, because as we found out, it's been very hard to pinpoint our Earth space, except for the fact that we know it has something to do with Earth. And so when we look at Earth and its position, we find it is this little tiny red dot in the bottom right-hand corner, what we call man's universe. And in man's universe, we occupy this little tiny red dot. So there's a reason for this confinement. And then we see that, oh, wait a second, there's the rest of the universe. And all we want is just this little piece of the pie. And so we find that through the teachings of Mr. Kesh and the initial 3 books, The Universal Order, Creation of Matters, which we found that all these matters come together and create a field. And from this source, we somehow see the manifestation of a soul, which corresponds to the origin of the universe. But if the universe originated this way, then what did the matter originate from? Because isn't the matter part of the universe? So this is where we always kind of see things backwards, and and we try and get grounded. But when you're in outer space, how do you get grounded when you're in outer space? You could easily be upside down. So there is another factor, and that is a link, and that is the structure of the light in book number 2. So which links between the source and your soul. And so how does that work? And we don't ask that question enough because we've always been having difficulty understanding a lot of things. And so an explanation has been put forward. And sometimes we don't know or don't understand that explanation. So we need to have some kind of proof. And so in the absence of a proper explanation, we need to look at nature. And so this is kind of difficult because we don't really know where nature is. But this is what we do know, is that we were born. And when we were born in a specific place. And that specific place was Earth. So let's, not be picking on Mars, but for instance, we were born on Earth and not on Mars. But we could say we were born on Earth and not on the moon, or not on Jupiter, or not on the sun either. But here we are, we want to leave, and so Earth is our reference field, and so we want to go somewhere. And so we could say we want to go to the planet Mars, and so that would be our landing point reference field. But the way we want to do this is not the way that we arrived here in the first place. So there's something wrong. And what is wrong is that we were born through a reference of preference and sentimentality to the Earth. And we were born using a system, and that we are not using in terms of our launch point. And then furthermore, if we want to return from wherever we're going, so our launch point actually becomes a landing point at the same time. And so therefore, wherever we're going becomes our landing point. So we have to remember that if we want to come back, that landing point then has to become a launch point. And so that completes the round trip. And we have to be very precise in our target shooting, and the way we want to come back, likewise, is not the way we were born. So what that means is that if you are looking for the proof and you can't accept the proof, then you can't accept the fact that you were born. And so that becomes ridiculous. And so we've come to this nebulous point of susceptibility. How do we go from here to there? And where exactly do we go? And, you know, like we laugh sometimes when people say, well, where am I? And then they ask the question, well, who am I? And then they ask the question, well, why am I? And so what we know is that we've come to Earth, and so we have this sentimentality for Earth. But what we do know about Earth is that it's not Venus and it's not Mars. And so how do we know that? And that's because Venus has a boundary and Mars has a boundary and Earth has a boundary. And so therefore we can identify what we are by our neighbors. And so we are not our neighbors. And so this is where we are. But Earth is not who we are. Earth is where we are. And so really the subject is, who are we? And so in order to understand all of this, we have to see that the universe operates by the same rules. So in other words, where we are and who we are and why we are follows the rules of plasma science. And so to review the basic rules, there are different energy states and they increase by at least an order of magnitude. And so the difference in these energy states means that there are higher and lower energy states, and the higher one feeds the lower one. So that's the rule. And so we understand that these energy states can change. And so these changes create a manifestation through either natural creation or natural decay. But there's a third way, and that is to be catalytic or non-consuming. And so we're trying to identify these energy state changes. But there's another thing that we find out, that there's a transfer rate. And that rate is higher in the higher states. And it too is higher by many orders of magnitude. So in order to go from one state to another, we find that this is done plasmatically, and it has to absorb fields. What exactly are we absorbing? And so we have to identify that. So if we're going to identify what we're going to absorb, and we at the same time have to identify who we are, so we have to create boundaries. And this is not entirely bad, except for the fact that if we are limiting ourselves. So what we're looking at is how to absorb plasma fields and which fields. And so fortunately for us, plasma is also a barrier of fields. So we don't really have to make those decisions as in saying that we have to do this. The universe does this automatically for us. When you consider that we have over 70 trillion cells in our body, and some of us brag about their multitasking capabilities, 70 trillion multitasking capabilities exceeds my personal capability. So I'm glad that the plasma fields that are working are bound to the ethos of the universe. So I don't have to worry about the interaction of these fields. And the problem is that we are able to interact with all of these fields on Earth. And so the question becomes, are we exclusive to Earth? And so the problem isn't how we interact with these fields. The problem really is understanding these fields. And so this is one of the reasons that I went through 6 weeks of identifying Earth space, because we really have to know where we are. But we find on Earth space that it has different transitions through its ranges between its magnetical and gravitational field forces. And so we discussed that kind of in detail, but the thing is that we don't understand how the rest of the universe works. And so if the way the rest of the universe works is based on our understanding how Earth works, then we have to conclude that we have no idea how the universe works, because we really don't have an idea how the Earth works. And so we get this nebulous idea. And isn't it interesting that we find that Nebo comes from Mount Nebo, and it means sky. And in this Mount Nebo, somewhere in the sky, is where Moses was granted the view of the promised land. So this point is somewhere. And so we're all looking for this pie in the sky. And I keep referencing this pie in the sky because it's not very precise. So, you know, if you're, doing target practice, the measurement of your success is the nearness and proximity to the bullseye. But before you hit the bullseye, you at least want to hit the target. So if you can't hit even the target, forget the bullseye. So the thing is that we are not in those 2 dimensions. That's not good enough. You have to understand that we're in 3 dimensions. And so the 2 dimensions contribute to the 3 dimensions. So we can conclude that 1 dimension plus another dimension is more than just 2 dimensions. And the reason I say that is because we know that if we hit the bullseye, then we have accurately fed back the 3rd dimension. And that would be the bullseye. So the target and the bullseye constitute the 3rd feedback dimension. But we are none of those dimensions. We are in a 4th dimension, because not only are we looking at it, but we're participating as the target shooter. So we reference pi as 3.14 and a bit and a bit and a bit, and it's all kind of, non-specific. And when we say non-specific, we have to understand that this is in many ways a poor quality of the way that we discuss things. So for instance, I mentioned poor quality. So that's a kind of quality. And we like to make things. And so we find that when we make things, we have to understand what those things are. So just to say to make things, to make a product, is another nebulous reference. So to understand product quality, you have to specify the kind of product, and you have to specify the kind of quality. And if you're going to specify that, then you have to specify the boundaries, right? So this is what this is, and this is what it is not. And so we do the same thing for ourselves. We have to say, well, this is me and this is not me. And so when we look at the double rainbow, we find that there are different fields. And with our inside rainbow, we find that we're in an Earth space, and on the outside the rainbow, we're in another Earth space. And we can see through, in between these 2 rainbows, another space. And so that space too is part of Earth space, but it's kind of different. And so to understand what that is, we've had to go through a series of finding what this nebulous field is all about. And so we find that This is our true essence. This is where we find the peace stone. And the peace is where we are, and the peace is what we are. Because the universe is a peaceful place, and we are from the universe. So we came from the universe to Earth space. So we are not Earth space. And when we shot at this target, in other words, we launched ourselves to come to Earth space, we find that, well, you know what? The Earth keeps moving. It's a moving target. But fortunately for us, it has a limited range, and that limit is it moves around the sun. So we can kind of get a nearness of where the Earth is, right? So we know that the Earth is in the range of the sun and some other planets. But depending on the season, it could be on this side of the sun, or it could be on the far side of the sun. So wherever the Earth space is, doesn't change who we are. It only changes the position of the Earth space. And then if we want to find out how we get to this Earth space, we have to make a relationship. And so if we just say we want to go to Earth space, that is not very precise. And then if we say, well, this is me, well, that's not very precise. So when you have a relationship of two things that are not very precise, we'll call that a very nebulous relationship. So this is our problem. We are saying that science meets the soul of man for peace. And science itself is kind of a nebulous reference. And with a lack of understanding, the soul of the man is kind of a nebulous reference. So to kind of help us along, we've created various groups around our planet. And so we see these various medallions from North America, Australia, Europe, and the Spanish community all over from South America to Asia. And we all put it together as part of the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute. And so that makes it a little bit more precise. And the thing is, there's a rule, and that is the Maggrav rule, which is the balance between the magnetical and gravitational force fields. And so this now can be applied to the scientific responsibility, which is to explain the plasma science. But there's also a spiritual responsibility to explain the plasma science. And so these are two individual fields of reference where you have the scientific community frequently says, I don't know. And you have the spiritual community who says, we don't want you to know. And so when we put those two together, we find that they affect the rate of change. So the plasma science needs to add to this knowledge to change the rate of change, right? And to bring the science and the soul of man together to meet for peace. And so where is this peace? So you're talking about field relationships. Is it the kind of a field relationship like a spider who makes a web and basically invites the fly to die inside the web? So this is kind of an adversarial versus a coexistence relationship. And so we discussed this in Earth space, and we relate it to the nanotechnology, right? With the nanotechnology, we have a nano coating. But in between the nano monatomic particles, we have a gap. And that is a nanogap. And so is that the inner space? So is the relationship between the nanostate and the nanogap where the science meets the soul of man for peace? Is this where the earth space and the inner space meet? And so the next few classes, we will try and pinpoint where this inner space is. The one thing that we can pinpoint is that when we look at the periodic table of elements, and the key point is that they are elements. In other words, they are the lowest common denominator. And so when we say the lowest common denominator is by field strength and by energy. And so each one is different and can maintain its common denominator and still be pinpointed, because there are boundaries and we use these boundaries numerically. And so we find that there's a relationship between these boundaries. Okay, so now we've identified individual elements, and so we can now have a relationship, and we have a relationship between carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and hydrogen. Those are our amino acids. We have a relationship between sodium, magnesium, potassium, and calcium. These are our salt environments. And then we have a relationship between iron, copper, and zinc, which happens to be the basic constructions of our physicality. And then there's also the silicon, which is the relationship to earth space. And does that mean the silicon is, and we call it inorganic because it's part of earth space? Does that mean we don't have silicon? Yes, we do. But we are considered carbon-based because that's organic. Does that mean the earth space doesn't have carbon? Well, no, that's not true. There is carbon in the earth space and there's silicon in the earth space. Well, there's carbon in our body and there's silicon in our body. And if this is confusing, we need to clarify that this is all dependent on fields. And so when we created the cup of life, what we did was we took physical zinc plate and a physical copper coil, and we took another copper coil that was physical, but we elevated the field strength by nanocoating it. And so now we had reference points, and each of these reference points conveyed a magnetical and gravitational field relationship. And we know that because this field relationship created a product. And so these products were created from the neighboring fields. And so the CO2 GANs and the calcium GANs, copper GANs, zinc GANs, amino acid GANs, and water GANs were created as products from the neighboring components within the cup of life reference field. So you have an overall reference field, and then you have individual reference fields, and each of them have boundaries. But interestingly enough, when you look at the GANs inside, you don't see any boundaries. And so when we launched the space program, we had a departure lounge, and we created 3 seats on the left side. But the departure lounge also became the arrivals lounge. And so we had 3 seats on the right-hand side. So we started off on the left-hand side in seat number 1, and we arrived back on the right-hand side in seat number 1. That's what we did in the first simulation flights. And so what I wanted to show with this diagram is the path that each of us took. And so we went from seat 1 on the left to seat 2 on the right to seat 3 on the left and into outer space. And then we returned, but we came back in seat number 3 on the right, went over to seat number 2 on the left, and then back to seat number 1 on the right. And so there's a crossover path. And why is that? So the first thing is we have set up a boundary identifying the chairs. We set up a boundary identifying the departure and the arrival. We set up a boundary with respect to our targets. And in order to understand our targets, there had to be an interaction, right? Because the target has to be somewhere. And so now we understand the relationship between the twin cups. So in order to make the twin cups work, we see what is wrong with the universal cup because it's feeding to itself. And that's not the way the universe works. What we have is a magnetical gravitational feeding, and we have a magnetical gravitational feedback, don't we? This is how it works. And so what we see is a product from this. But there are also things there that we can't see. And so that becomes the problem. So in order to solve that problem, we created the cups of life where we could actually see an interaction of two cups, one of which was the physical cup and one of which was the emotional cup. And what we couldn't see was that nebulous point in between the two cups, and we couldn't see those nebulous points that were creating the ganses in the cups. And so if we wanted to identify individually the emotional cup and the physical cup, we would keep them 1 meter apart. But if we put them together and we added more cups, we found that each cup had a magnetical gravitational relationship, and at the core it had the soul. And then we find that when we put all 5 cups together, and what are those 5 cups? So there's an emotional and physical cup. There's a cup of the soul. Okay, well, that's us. And then there's the cup of the earth. Well, wait a second, that's not us. And then there's an interaction between us and the earth, and we call that the cup of inertia. Well, what exactly is the cup of inertia? Because we are us and the earth is not us. So now we have something else. And so what is that? Is that part of inner space? And so let's review the rule, the plasma feeding rule. The higher strength feeds the weaker strength. Okay, so what are the options? Well, we can be fed the universal harvesting way, where we have 2 PM ticks come together and they create 3 dimensions, and then we feed back, and this is called self-enhancement. Or we can do it the earth space way and loosh harvest, where we are self-consuming and we also consume others. And so this becomes a diminishing manifestation. And as a result, what happens in that case? So then you find that when these 2 fields come together, these fields become conflict fields. And in between these conflict fields comes a conflict point. And the reason it's a conflict point, because that's not me. That conflict point is not me. That conflict point is because of my neighbors. So my neighbors caused me my conflict. So my conflict is as a result of my neighbors. So it's my neighbors who are causing the conflict. And I'm a product of that. So what I am is not me. It's what my neighbors are is what's me. And this is what's been so difficult for me personally to understand this when I first learned about this, because I had no plasmatic reference. I couldn't understand which one is me and which one is not me, because I didn't understand that me is a product of my reference fields. So me is not me. Me is just a product. So what is me? If these fields come together, is it an explosion? Is it a glow? Is it a glitter? Or is it a shining example of what we want to do? So let's be more observant. Let's look at how the universe works. And we find the universe is very peaceful. Well, let's look at Earth space. And we say, oh my, Earth space is very binding, because we keep double crossing and stealing and lying and cheating at the expense of others. And we don't realize that when we do this, then we become the product.
Alex,
And
Alex, excuse me, Alex, I sent you a couple of messages, sorry.
in the chat,
Yes, direct to you.
well, I'm trying to find them. Sorry.
Well, I said MTK just joined us, MTK just appeared, and Papa Bear is in the house. So,
Well, isn't it interesting? We now understand where Manspace is.
I thought he may have some interesting tidbits, or he's just here as a knowledge seeker. Let's not pressure Mr. Kesh at all. Not that he can be pressured.
Okay, well, where are we? We are halfway through this journey. Are you would you be okay if I
If
carried
he'd
on?
like to come in, he can come in. If not, then you just continue on, and he's welcome to come in at his time.
Okay, so let's play this by ear, which is kind of nebulous, isn't it? So anyway, I will carry on, because we are now finding that our relationship that's most important is with respect to man space. And in that man space, we have a physicality, and then we have a non-physicality. And then we have something else that's going on, which we call the emotional connection. And so most of what we are is not visible, and we really don't understand where we are. So this is what we have to figure out, where we are and who we are. And so we really have to identify manifestation. So the key about the manifestation is, because the manifestation is when two fields come together, but not only two. The point is that the formation of any field is a manifestation. And because this manifestation could be non-tangible or tangible, or non-visible or visible, means that it can be either a plasmatic reality or a physical reality. But is the reality only in the physicality, or can it be in the plasmatic reality? And then what is this emotional reality? And so we find that all of these realities are a form artifact of our field references. And these are all manifestations from energy in motion. And so this energy in motion has to come from some point and target to some kind of field. And then from that field, it can go on to some other point. And so this is what we're trying to learn. And so in order to learn this, we needed to create boundaries. And so we find that our physicality is just an illusion. And when we say it's an illusion, then what are we? If our physicality is an illusion, then what is the reality? And so we've seen that, you know, when they teach us in business school, the implication is of success. And that's an illusion because the reality is bankruptcy. And then if we look at the gold, that's an illusion because it's actually garbage. So where is the gold? And then when we look at the gateway to that, that's just an illusion. So we're not really understanding the gateway because we don't understand the launch point or the landing point. So everything is just like a nebulous reference field. And so it becomes an illusion. Life becomes an illusion. Well, that's fine. All those people who are learning about esoteric things or new age, shall we say. So we understand the word illusion. Okay, great. But what is that? How can you be precise if you can't be precise? So the illusion becomes some kind of nebulous reference field. So we need to be a little bit more precise. So let's look at the rules of the principle of the twinity. And we find that it has to do with the fields of the electron and the proton interacting. And so this interaction of these two fields is what we call the atom. And the atom is the representation on the periodic table of elements. Our life is based on the pursuit of happiness. I don't see the pursuit of happiness on the periodic table of elements. All I see is that, you know, the failures in man's tiny universe, where we have tiny pimples and massive cow patties, because we are not understanding the relationship between our ecology and our economy. We measure economy by money, and we discount the ecology. We try and relate the ecology in some money way, and we don't understand how the universe works. So what we have to understand is that energy travels in packs. We call them PM ticks. This is the magnetical feeding of the universe. And it creates a force field consisting of principal matter, transition matter, and convergence matter. And so that creates a maggrav, which becomes the gravitational point. But where is this point? So we have to have some kind of feedback. Feedback to what? Another maggrav. Oh, so 1 + 1 is more than 2. Okay, but you see, we have 1 + 1 on one side and more than 2 on the other side. And then we have this equal sign or greater than sign in between. Well, that's the inertia. That is the product of the interaction. And that interaction is the basis of the plasma science, which is basically the field forces of attraction and repulsion. These are magnetical field forces. These magnetical field forces consist of both a magnetical and a gravitational field force, which is, in simple terms, a feeding and a feedback system. Because we have to absorb fields. Oh, but we also have to have a barrier. So in other words, we have to have boundary. And so we have a neutron, which has a boundary, and we have an atom, which has a boundary. And within that boundary, we have an electron and a proton, and each of those are within a boundary. Oh, and by the way, in between, in part of this model of nuclear decay of the neutron, we have the PM ticks, who they themselves have their own boundary. Okay, well, that's good. So now everybody's got their boundary. And so that identifies all the players, but it doesn't talk about the interaction. You see, because when these two forces come together, they create another boundary, because it is at this point that we have a Maglev condition of the balancing of the magnetical gravitational field forces. And so we have a creation. And this is what happened in our GANs. But look what happened in the middle of our GANs. This is GANs in the bottle. And there's some kind of hole in their middle there. And we don't see anything there. And so it's transparent, or it's disappeared, one or the other. But the thing is, there's no real boundary there. It's kind of like a fuzzy boundary. And so we find that the GANs, one moment, please. Thank you. We find that the GANs is kind of white, which means it's a zinc and CO2 GANs. And so this is our emotional gateway. But there's something somewhere still in the middle, and we can't identify it. We can't put a boundary on it. And so we call this the bonding point. And it's a boundary between creation and decay. But because ray motion is a two-way street, so whether you are creating or whether you're decaying, it's still part of creation. So we have a natural creation and a natural decay on one side, and we have a natural creation and natural decay on the other side. And so therefore we have to have the same thing at the bonding point. And where exactly is this bonding point? So if we look at what was most important to us, and it's not Earth space, the most important thing to us is our man space. And that's not to indicate gender, that's just generic man space. And so at some point, man space has a field, and then within that field, we have that point. And from that point, we create this feeding radiance. Well, this feeding radiance is not part of Earth space. And it's really not part of man space. So is it inner space? And if it's feeding out, then it's feeding back to maintain this man space. But every time these two fields come together, you have a manifestation. And there's a plasmatic manifestation and a physical manifestation. So to identify which is which, you have to kind of create boundaries. It's very hard to pinpoint these boundaries. But when we have the physical manifestation of light, we can see the color spectrum. And so that kind of identifies things on our behalf. And so what happens is that we can see the emission spectra. We can see the emission spectra of what we are. And so that identifies who we are. we can see the creation of other reference fields. And we can absorb other reference fields. Likewise, these other reference fields can absorb what we emit. And so the point is that you have to have two reference points. So where you launch from and where you land to, and the transition in between is this transfer of energy. And where exactly is this transfer of energy? Where exactly is this PM tick? And so, which PM tick are you talking about? It's an illusion. Energy is always in motion. So it's not the PM tick that matters, it's the reference field. And so we look at our Earth space and we see, well, we have a northern Earth space and we have a southern Earth space, and we have this equator supposedly in the middle, but collectively, this is our Earth space. And so you can see that if we don't understand our Earth space, and if we don't understand how these rotating hemispheres come together plasmatically and manifest into the physicality, we get kind of pinched in the middle and we get in a bind. And so the question then becomes, if we look at our plasmatic spectrum and we see that it's possible to be in a physicality spectrum, that in between, we could say, is our inner space. And our inner space is interacting with this plasmatic spectrum. But at the same time, being a two-way street, it interacts with our physicality spectrum. Okay, so that kind of explains the covalent bonding. But where exactly is this inner space? And so if we want to be precise about that, we have to create these boundaries. So let's look at our solar system and let's look at all these boundaries. Well, there aren't any boundaries. There's just a big field we call the solar system. And then inside this field are all our potential landing points. And which one do you want? And who decides? And if we look at the sun, that is one target. And who decided on that target? And why is it at the center? It's the center of the solar system space. So that sun space is at the center. Well, that sun space is not the planet space. And so the planets run around the sun, and some are Earth space, some are Mars space, some are Jupiter space. So these are all planets. And then, but wait a second, the moon is not a planet, and the moon is not a sun, but the moon rotates around the Earth. So that's another space. So we have Earth space, moon space, sun space, solar system space, and then there's the space in between these spaces, this in-between space named somewhere. We don't know where it is. It's wherever it is, it's there. And so when we look at the explanation of the soul sequencing, we find that we have to have two references. So we find that the soul of the sun plus the soul of the earth attracts the soul of the man. Okay, well, that's being a little bit more precise, isn't it? And so now that we have the soul of the man, it interacts with the soul of the earth and creates the soul of the body. Okay, we're getting a little bit closer to the target. And so the soul of the body, it interacts with the soul of the earth. Well, there you go. Now we manifest the physicality of the body. What's the common denominator? It's the soul of the earth. But we are in Earth space. So when we look at the soul of the earth relationship, well, all we are seeing is the physicality of our body. We are seeing our emotion and our physical existence interacting to create this physicality of the body. But, where's this earth space? And so the thing is that earth space is the physicality of the earth body. It only stands to reason that the physicality of our body is in the physicality of the earth body. So the soul of our body is interacting with our physicality of the body. So the soul of our body is in the inner space. Well, if the soul of our body is in the inner space and our body is in the earth space, then the earth body is also part of the inner space, the soul of the earth body. So the soul of the earth body to the physicality of the earth body is as the soul of the body to the physicality of the body. So we see that the earth space and the inner space have a relationship. And this is where we're at. So now we understand that the limitations of what we're looking at, the physicality, which is the speed of light, does not take into account the ethos of the universe, which involves morality, compassion, and courage, which are the cornerstones of creation, because life wants to live. So that's the rule. So if life wants to live, that is what's part of creation. And so if we are not in sync with that, then we are in conflict. And so we have a choice. Do we do the universal peace and prosperity, or do we do the earthbound war and poverty? And so the debate rages, and there's a lot of emotion attached to that. And so we find that within our earth space, we have this inner space, and this inner space is the emotion, energy, manifestation. And so we have a lot of garbage, but we have no place to throw it. And the reason for that is because there is no away. We can't throw it away. When we look at the solar system, there is no planet away, there's no moon away, there's no sun away. So we can't just identify and say, this is not my garbage, this is your garbage, or this is my garbage over there. I cannot throw away my garbage. So the garbage that we throw away is feeding back to us. So you have one feedback and another feedback. And is it all garbage? Well, no, it's all our point of view. So we understand that there's a physical state and a plasmatic state. And all of this is the matter. And when we look at the matter, we find that each matter, whether it's in a plasmatic state, is a maggraph. And if it's in the physical state, it's a maggraph. The difference being the physical state is of a lower energy state. So this is the question, which is the dominant state that you're interacting with. So the subject today is boundaries. So let's understand this, because this is very difficult to understand. It's confusing. And I'm hoping that I can eliminate that confusion, you see, because we all want a piece of the pie. So to say, if you just look at the North American pie here, and to divide up North America, we have to create these boundaries. So we have US in Alaska, and we have Canada up north, and the US below the 49th parallel, and below that is Mexico, and then it's Guatemala and Belize. And so we're identifying all these places. And of course, these are the land fields, but then we have water fields. and those are Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Okay, so now we've identified this, but we've identified Earth space in relationship to physicality. But the physicality is a product of the neighbors. Without the neighbors, you can't have the product. So if we say Canada, Canada is defined as not the USA. So the Canada is the neighbor, USA. And the USA is on both sides. There's one in Alaska. So we are the product in Canada of what's part of Alaska and what's part of the USA. So Canada is not Canada. Canada is the product of the neighboring pieces. Well, if that's confusing, check this out. USA has the same problem, you see, because the USA is not the USA. USA is the product of its neighbors. And the thing about the USA, it has a contiguous connection between Alaska on the way up north and then the main body in North America. And so if we say that the neighbor to Canada is Canada, by definition, because we've identified it as by boundary. And so it makes sense if we look at Alaska, we say, oh, well, that's not USA, no, that's Canada. Okay, well, that's good. And then we find that where Canada is, well, that's the USA. Okay, well, that's good. And then we find, well, wait a second. Now, south of the 49th parallel, that's Canada, not the USA. Well, then what happens south of that? Well, now we have USA and Mexico. Oh, okay, well, now we have another confusion. So let's look at Mexico and say, okay, well, so Mexico is not Mexico because it's defined by its neighbors. So therefore, Mexico is part of the USA. And Mexico is part of Belize and part of Guatemala. Well, this creates more confusion now because the not USA is either Canada or Mexico. And this is not a commentary on the immigration policy. This is causing a problem. This is causing a conflict. And if you think that's bad, Mexico is even worse because now you've got not Guatemala and not Belize and not Mexico. And so you've got more field references. And so we're finding that what we've created by creating boundaries, we've created problems. And so we find that when we are looking for peace, peace doesn't have a boundary. You see, because the boundaries are bound by man-made laws, and man-made laws are limiting. And so we can see how the confusion is created. And so when we look at the universal laws, we find that the universal role of man follows the universal laws, and those laws are unlimited. And this is how the plasma science is working. It's working with the unlimited universal laws. And so Earth itself has no boundaries. Okay, so if we remove all the boundaries of defining what we think we are and understand that we are all the products of our neighboring pieces, then we find that we're not the USA, we're not Canada, we're not Mexico, we're none of these places. We are this land in between the Pacific and the Atlantic, but the Pacific and the Atlantic are oceans. So we are a land between two oceans. The two oceans created the land. And so now you understand why Christopher Columbus was so confused and he thought he got to India. And of course he figured he discovered that although he was greeted by humans. And so, where did those humans come from? So he was not the first. So what we realize is that not only does the universe exist from energy, and so it creates a maggraph as seen on the cover of book number 1, but there has to be a reference. There has to be a relationship, and that's why all things work in combination. So what we are looking at, the manifestation of the maggraph, is a product of reference fields. 1 + 1 is more than 2. And then which field? And so when we look at nature, what we're seeing is a reflection. So when we look at blue jeans, they're actually not blue jeans. They are reflecting the color blue. And when we look at nature, it's reflecting green. But when we apply the plasma science, something amazing happens. And so what you're looking at here is a picture of a dandelion. And yes, it is 1 meter tall. I have never seen a dandelion more than a few centimeters off the ground. A tall one would be, I don't know, 10 centimeters. This one is 1 meter tall. I didn't have to bend over to take a picture of it. This is the dividend from the plasma science. And so we understand the dandelion. Maybe now we understand Leo, the vandalized lion. The vandalized lion, which we call the Sphinx. And so we find that when we look at our history is created by our neighbors. And our neighbors are gone. You don't see them in this picture. All what you see is the product. And so it is this product which comes from energy in motion. And we have diversity on this planet because all of these have a component, an individual uniqueness, but they all have this sentimentality and preference to Earth. These are all part of creation. And there's an indomitable spirit that defaults to this energy. This energy is about peace. And so what we find in the plasma science is that the warmongers cannot operate with this, see, because what we are is part of the universal community, which is peaceful. And what is not us is this illusion of physicality. And so if we are concentrating on this illusion of physicality and we are warmongering, then we harvest war and poverty, and we lose the benefits of peace and prosperity. And so that becomes a limiting factor. And so we say, well, the war is me and the peace is not me. We have it backwards. We are the peace bridge. And so when people ask you to tell us what is plasma, just tell them it's a kind of energy state. And it helps us understand our earth space. And it's a very important thing because it transcends the limitations of everything that we know. And so we find that there is more than just the illusion of our physicality. Our physicality is nothing more than a feedback of the feedback we get from our neighbors. But there's another space, there's an inner space. And it is with this inner space that we find that we get this emotion energy manifestation. So our energy manifestation through emotion becomes an energy manifestation in our physicality. This is all working together. And so when we look at the vision enhancement system and we want to facilitate the PTSD recovery from the US military, we're talking about the inner space emotion energy manifestation. So is it soul enhancement? Is it spirit enhancement? Are we defining boundaries, or are we modifying the feedback? We are defaulting to the pathway manifestation of our physicality, and our physicality is peaceful. That's the default. And so to understand the plasma science, we now see that there's a capability of dematerialization and materialization. And this is all part of the more advanced science, because we all want to go back to normal. But where is this normal? Can you pinpoint it on a map? Well, no, because you see, the majority of us are normal. We are seeking freedom and emancipation because that's the universe. That's what the universe does. And we see that in the earth. The earth is seeking freedom and emancipation as well, because it has an existence. And man has an existence, and our existence is in an existential crisis, because we need to understand how to harvest the plasma energy of the plasma universe. And so there is this peace dome that's around us. This is our refuge. And this peace dome is facilitated through the connection of our presence. And so we want to pinpoint on the map where exactly is this peace dome, and we want to pinpoint exactly our interaction with this. So it doesn't come to pinpoint the physical point. What it comes is to understand the relationship of the sun space, the planet space, the moon space, and all of this in between space, which we like to identify as, our target points. But what we don't see are the reference fields, because what we do see is an illusion. And as long as we are insistent on sitting on that lily pad of illusion, we will not see the reference points. All we see is the product, and our product is the illusion. So we are in this nebulous point, and so instead of creating hell on earth, we need to understand that we are in heaven, and we can transcend all these energy states. And we look at the connection, and the connection is not necessarily the next door neighbor. There is a contiguous connection by field strength. The field strength connection transcends the physical boundaries. That's why there's a difference between the June 6th launch, because prior to June the 6th, we never went into outer space. We are still in Earth space. This is the Keshe Foundation, Spaceship Institute. Teachings in plasma science, calling all Earth space patriots. Signed the World Peace Treaty. That's the reference of the universal community. Earth has no boundaries. Plasma science has no limitations. We can transform the earthbound physical and emotional vitality by learning how to transmit. There's a transparency point, there's a manifestation point, and this transmutation is a two-way street. So to understand the universal refugium of the nebulous universal community, So we need to relearn our inner space, to relearn the universal language of freedom. That's why plasma science needs to be delivered in exchange for peace on Earth. You saw this coming. Welcome to the outer space age. This is the end of the lesson. Thank you all for listening.
And thank you all for sharing the knowledge of the universe, the knowledge of the creator, the knowledge of creation, Alex, and for your dedication to coming in week in and week out to help usher in the peace. You spoke about illusions, you spoke about energy interactions, and you spoke about what we call the dream. Irmgard had shared something earlier with us about this state, and of course we'd like to give you a minute or two break, or three, before we ask any questions. I also want to welcome John Bliven for joining us here today. And I'm wondering if is still with us. I see you're under two different systems here, If you'd like to share something about your experience, you said it was quite real, and I know we talked about the flight simulation mobile experience, but maybe you'd like to share something with us about your experience, and we want to give you that opportunity.
Well, thank you. We gotta turn one thing off.
Yeah, you'll have to mute the other system. Okay, great. I think this will help to elevate all of us.
Yeah, I just woke up, so.
It's okay. If you'd like to come back a little bit later.
I take this all in my sleep, and then I dream about things. I had a very unusual dream.
A little louder, please, for all of us to hear you.
And when I woke up, I couldn't figure out where I was, because I thought that the dream was real, and what I woke up to was not real. And I guess maybe that is. So I'm still waking up, so hang on, excuse me very much.
Do you want to take a few minutes and we'll come back to you, even if it's at the end?
Dream, I visited with my mentor from years ago, who at that time was very, very much in my life in a way like Mr. Kesh. Not at the same level, but even equally important for me. So maybe you should start with the other person so I can wake up and I can collect my thoughts better, because instead of my sleep, you just woke up.
That's fine, That's fine. Yes, we hear you. I think your system is not connected as clearly as it should be either, for us to really enjoy your interaction and what you shared earlier today.
Maybe Mark went to sleep.
No? Can you hear me?
Okay. I think maybe 2 weeks ago or so, Mr. Kesh was on, and we talked about the possibility of doing a project together with, because I needed a bunch of the little devices, the units. I'm still asleep. Anyway, I have ordered 25 units, and we are going to do something with it. Because we have apartments, and I was going to put these in the apartments, and then we could create some kind of a larger area that is influenced or is under this energy of this unit. What happened was that when I was looking around and talking to different people about this, I ran into so much objection, because I had talked to people over the years, and and I was still waiting for products that had never come. Expensive products, do something crazy. And so I ran into all kinds of resistance from friends and family, and I could not get anybody to really be interested in joining me with the project. So I reinvestigated I went through all my own doubts about Mr. Kesh, and we visited the Veterans Today, and everything that I knew about Mr. Kesh, or thought I knew about Mr. Kesh, was confirmed massively. So after that, I could proceed with my positive thoughts and my positive experience, and just go with what we had started doing. And in that context, I had this dream about this mentor of mine, and he was a cardiac cripple. He couldn't do much but sit around and lay in his bed and just share his thoughts. And then we implemented his thoughts. And so I had the opportunity to share with this man in my dream about Mr. Kesh, and he was totally taken and totally supported me in doing this. The problem was, when I woke up, I didn't have any idea where I was, and the dream was so much more real than what I was coming back to. Extremely confusing. So I'm wondering if this was one of the kinds of travel. I think now that it is, and that what I'm doing here now or now is not real. So consider yourself in my non-real world. And that was the profoundness of the experience. So thank you for your time.
Yes, we've often heard from Mr. Kesh that the matter state is the illusion, and what we call the dream state is the reality. And I know that's very difficult for most of us, including myself, to truly understand. But we're glad you had this interaction, and I think you're going to be creating a beautiful dome in your area, and feeding, attracting, creating wellness, creating energies, and again, just another oasis being set up around this planet to achieve what we're setting out to achieve. Thank you, for sharing with us the I know I've woken up many times, as we all have, and said how real it was. We were totally enthralled in the dream, or what we call the dream state. But now we're learning consciously we can move this way. And eventually we'll be learning how to manifest the physicality at certain positions. But we're going step by step. We're doing it the correct way. And it will take a bit of time, but I think things will start to move very quickly once things get rolled out in the proper way. So thank you again, for sharing with us your experience. I know we reviewed a little bit about Mr. Kesh coming into the reactor group. We want to thank him for frequent flyer miles that many of us that were there got to experience. We went through a number of them. I don't think Jacob had gotten to say anything, or Jalal joined us a little late after we heard his testimonial, or what he experienced in this mobile flight experience. And I know there's probably questions for Alex, but can we give Jalal some time if he wants to add anything from that experience on Wednesday, this past Wednesday. He could be out sailing, I'm not sure, or not close to the mic, because normally he loves to interact and share. Okay, can we give an opportunity to John while he's here? I noticed he's manifested himself here today. Is there any news you'd like to share with us before we go to questions with Alex or Mr. Cash?
I don't have any real news, but you know, if you think about what's coming forward, we're now dealing with energies of a higher vibration. You can think of it almost like the carbon, going from carbon 12 to carbon 14. These new energies are now becoming available to us, and they're being radiated out in ways that are not to our current understanding. So if we think about the quantum field, these people that have gone into these machines are able to reconnect to these units and these energy fields after they've left. So they're now tapping into this higher vibrational universal consciousness energies, which is allowing their souls to become awakened, depending on what their free will choices are. So with this new system that's coming available, we're going to be tapping into this quantum nature of these universal energy fields, which will allow the universal energy fields to be spread from our soul to other souls. So it's exciting times. These units that are coming forward are, I'll say, the tip of the iceberg to, you know, the universal changes that are coming. And there's more to the experience than maybe a lot of people understand. I think when you do the transmutation, if he's able to successfully achieve it, you should be able to tap into that same transmutation energies. I'm going to say anytime you want. I haven't experienced it, but that's my feeling of what it's about. So it will be very exciting times. When he says they can't control the borders, I don't believe they're going to be able to control the borders. And we'll see how it goes. That's all I got.
Thank you, John. Alex, we're talking about unifying the planet into the one nation, one planet, one race for world peace. How does that equate with unifying the unicos? We know that the mother universe created all the other universes, even though they divided and created another universe out of them. But it all came from, let's say, the mother universe, which split and so on and so forth. So what is meant, or why is it needed to unify the unicos? Are we just seeing this planet becoming unified as a microcosm of what we'll see in the larger context over probably maybe a longer period of time?
So you're directing that question to me, and
If you'd like it, sure.
I will like to endeavor to answer that question. Because like every good detective, you have to look at the absence of evidence. And so, you know, the absence of evidence is, like you said, why. And so why is actually the answer. So first of all, there is a battle, and this battle is you know, for Earth. And why is Earth so important? Because there's no other place to throw garbage. So nothing in the universe is garbage. Everything that is physically manifest is a product. It's just our interpretation of that product, which is the problem. So, you know, as we say, one man's garbage is another man's gold. But the thing is that this problem on this planet actually has gone beyond just the boundary of this planet. And so it is present in the rest of the universe. And this is going down the wrong path, because it's creating an environment which is going against the universal laws. The problem is that the universal laws are working at a higher energy level, and we are not achieving that energy level at this point in time because we're preoccupied with these lower energy levels. And so these, shall we say, warmongering attitudes and attributes can only operate in these lower energy levels. So because we are not garbage, the universal community cares for us. And they care for us seemingly more than we care for ourselves. But that's not really true, because that's just an illusion. And that illusion keeps getting reinforced 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it's only when we have these meetings and get-togethers that we are breaking that illusion. So one of the problems with respect to that illusion is, if our physicality, which we can pinpoint because we know where we are, you know, I'm just going to assume that you're at this meeting and you're sitting in a chair at your computer or device, so you know where you are. But that's an illusion. Well, if that's an illusion, then where exactly are you? Well, if you are a product, so, you know, are you in two places, or are you part of a coexistence? And if you are a part of a coexistence, then you're part of the universal community as well. And so therefore we have to understand that. And we're not accepting that for the reasons of our limitations. So by taking off the boundaries, as we look at the earth, and if you're a visitor to the earth, you don't know if you're in North America or South America. You have no idea. You don't care. You know, are you, you know, in France, or are you in Germany? What's the difference? It doesn't matter. You're on Earth. So we don't look at Mars the same way, do we? You know, anyone from Mars, we would say, is a Martian. But is it possible that there are different species on Mars? So it's not that we don't know, it's just nothing's being disclosed, because we have traveled to Mars. But, you know, my basic resentment comes from, we have this magnificent telescope now in the sky, but we don't have a map of the dark side of the moon, which is our immediate backyard. So, you know, we like to go gallivanting off out into outer space, but we can't take care of business back home. And universal community is not happy with that attitude, because we have to clean up our own garbage, you know, before we go someplace else. no one likes a tourist who throws garbage. We like to have tourists, but we don't want them to be detrimental to an environment. And so this is where it comes down to. And if we understand the nature of being able to transcend these different energy levels, then we can organize not only our physicality, but we can organize our souls, because that method is the identical method regardless of which space you're traveling through. The rules are the same. The rules of identical gravitational field forces interacting. That's the part that we have to learn and then apply. And that's where we're at. We're in the point of incorporating this into our physical reality. As Ern said, the dream state seemed more real than the physicality. Well, there's a key point. We are putting a boundary between our dream state and our physicality. If the earth has no boundaries, then these energy states have no boundaries. What they have is a barrier, and that barrier is manifest in its place based on susceptibility. And when that susceptibility changes, then there has to be a path link to another susceptibility. And the path link is determined by field strength. So the field strength of the plasmatic manifestation, whether it's physical or plasmatic, is based on path link and susceptibility. And that is the unified field theory of the energy in motion in the universe. But a theory is only a theory until it has been disproven. And the problem with that is that the proof of concept is in the fact that we were born. Good question, Mark. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alex. I'm going to ask again, is anyone here for the first time? I see a name I don't recognize. Now, that person, Ms. Stoop, if you can hear me, maybe you'd like to tell us where you're from, or you've been around the foundation much longer than most of us. Could you just tell us who you are and where you're from and how you found our group, if you can hear me? Okay, she could be from one of the international groups, or we welcome you if you're here for the first time. Anyone else want to bring up a question? A general question that anyone here could answer or would like to take up, or you could direct it at Alex or any of the other participants, I think.
Hello, Mark. It's
Oh, I was
Gail.
going to call on you, Gail. Sorry.
did
I
you?
saw you wrote something in the chat. Go right ahead.
Yeah, I did. Thanks. I'm not sure exactly. I did say when we receive energies from the universe, I think Mr. Kesh mentioned that we have to be sure that we're receiving correctly for planet Earth, for example. So I wanted to know if, like, should it go through the soul first, but it can affect the soul? Or is there something that we can do, or is it already taken care of in the universe? Like, do we receive what we really need without damaging ourselves? I hope that's clear.
Well, one of the things I noticed is we heard that in the enhancement center, we're teaching the soul how to feed the physicality. And someone said yes, because the soul doesn't really think or doesn't think the physicality needs to be fed. So there's something about teaching the soul how to absorb the more energy to feed the physicality. Anyone else?
Thanks, Mark.
I really didn't think the soul needed to be taught much. I thought the soul had a double PhD in this knowledge at one point, but then I heard it said or spoken that we're teaching the soul how to feed the physicality.
Yeah, it's a bit confusing because we have the soul is assumed to be perfect and pure. And yet we find there are souls that are not. So it's kind of confusing. Do
Well,
we
I
depend?
think the souls are. It's just the soul of physicality, which is the lion, that is not.
Okay, so the soul itself is pure.
The soul
But
of the man, yes.
the soul, yes, okay. So the problem comes with the soul of physicality then.
Yes, this lion that we're trying to get to sleep with the lamb. And that was a thought I had earlier as well.
Mhm.
It seems like the more we take energies from the matter state, the less we can absorb energies from the universe in a way, even though like 80% is what everyone's been given.
But our
So-
soul can be damaged, and the soul of the man, because then you end up being dust.
No, nothing can touch the soul, perhaps the soul of the man, except some energies, perhaps in the universe. But that
That's
was
what
one of the first things it was mentioned to us about people coming back a day or two later and reporting they're not hungry. Stefania reported that as well. I think others have, Galib had reported that as well. That food didn't have this emotional connection as it seemed to have. And that was a question I was going to ask for Alex, is about you mentioned the spider and the fly. Now, if the spider is satisfied with the fields and a fly lands in the web and it starts fluttering around, and normally that's a sense that the spider has to go and do something. Would the spider then, or we could take the shark, when the shark hears all this thrashing in the water, it goes over, it's almost like the antenna comes up and says, now I go into action. Would, if they're satisfied by the fields, would they cut the fly loose at that point? Or would they still go and wrap him up and take his energy later?
So the way we're going to do it will be without a web later on. I don't know. I have a question. Let's just say that we start off with 1,000 points and we're eating and killing the animals and so on, and then our soul loses points, so that when we do die and the soul becomes free, we're not strong enough to manifest a universe or even a good man again. So that's really what I'm asking about, I think, because we can lose points when we do wrong.
Again, someone want to take that question? And I hope you get to see that and sit down with some of those taxi people in your area and show
Yes.
them what was shared in the Brazilian teaching with
Yes.
the battery and the coil, especially a
Absolutely.
mechanic, even starting with a mechanic. And
Yes,
these
they have.
taxi drivers are all looking to try and save or maximize their fuel. And as you said,
Mhm.
tires were going up 40%. I think that's a beautiful and simple way to start with them,
Yeah,
like
it is.
enjoying a taste of the plasma technology with just a nano-coated coil on the negative end of the battery, which almost everyone can do.
Yes, but everything of these mechanics is done outside. There's no building or anything that they go into. They just crawl under, pull
Hmm.
the bonnet up, and
Backyard
so
mechanics. Yep, we have them here.
and they're good because those taxis have to run. But
I think you
maybe-
should take your laptop and share it with one who may try it and share it with the other. And I think you'll see free rides for Gail on the taxi at some
No, I
point.
think I'm sorry, but I think it's free laptop for the guys. It'll be
Okay.
gone in a second, but yes, we can manage something, I think.
I think you could definitely take one mechanic and start there and expand that
Mhm.
little nano-coated wire. We
Yes.
saw it, and just play the Brazilian teaching, or we'll bring Vernie in to share something as well.
Oh, he
Just to
will
get a
definitely.
taste of the
He will
plasma technology. And
Mhm.
again, Mr. Kesh says they have, of course, they're not fire coating and they're not caustic coating. They're using certain ovens, I think, or specially made ways of getting a perfect nano coating. But I was just very amazed about what the person said with his motor scooter or motorbike, and how he knows the tank perfectly well. Whenever he hits 180 miles or kilometers, he has to switch over to the reserve tank. And, you know, he's every time it's 180 miles and then switch to the reserve tank. Now with the nano-coated wire coming off the negative of the battery, and he had it on the scooter connected to the frame. I don't know exactly if that improved it or not, but he said then he went up to 200 miles before he had to switch on the reserve tank. Then he went up to 220 miles before he had to switch on the reserve tank. Then he went to 240 miles before he had to switch on to the reserve tank. So that's a beautiful elevation with a simple nano-coated wire coiled
Yeah.
on the negative point of the battery. So that's a taste of the plasma technology. And I
Yeah,
know the
because-
foundation's going for much bigger with gas units and CO2 units and methane units and energy enhancements and freestanding generators. But to introduce someone to the technology with just a nano-coated wire,
Mhm. It's the best way to start small.
I think it's a beautiful way. And we thank the Brazilian team, and we thank, I'm not sure who shared that there, but it could have been Alex.
We're past 26. We've gone beyond 26 rands per liter now, so it's getting kind of desperate. Yeah, we'll see what happens.
Mhm.
I'm sure they'll appreciate something like that.
I'm sure they'll appreciate you sharing knowledge with them, space technology.
I hope so. Yeah, thanks.
I just want to answer Gail's question there, and that has to do with that the plasma energy, the stronger feeds the weaker. That is also true in the physical state. And so what you're looking at in terms of the physical state, because it is the lowest energy level, then it acts as kind of a drain. It drains the energy. And then so what we're doing is draining that energy from the plasma state and then converting it into the kind of energy states that we want. And we've only identified DC, AC 120, AC 220, but there's also a plasma state, but we don't have plasma tools. So, you know, we're not really using the plasma energy as of yet. So we're in the transition state. And of this industrial revolution, if you will. So what we're saying is that the industrial revolution is like the horse and buggy revolution to the internal combustion vehicle is from the physical state to the plasma state. So that's the kind of the gap that we have to bridge. And so we want to do this as gracefully as possible in the face of unbelievable resistance. And it's not the unbelievability based on its magnitude. It's really based on its persistence, because the resistance is the difference of another transition, and that is from war and poverty to peace and prosperity. So that is what's mind-boggling. And there are 8 billion people on this planet who are asking that question as to why we're having this resistance. Back to you, Mark.
Alex, I'm going to step away for less than 2 minutes. Can you carry on, please? Or anyone
Certainly.
else would like to pose a question, please? I'll be right back.
Alex, thank
I
you.
did.
Thank you very much. I also wanted to pinpoint, because I think it was mentioned that we have to be careful when we pull in energy from the universe, that it is correct for us.
The energy from the universe takes care of itself because of the common denominator. It's the energy of our neighbors that we have to be careful of because of the immediacy, the nearness and proximity. So if I go back to this sentimentality, if we are to arrive in physicality on a planet, we have to make a difference between the planet Earth and the planet Mars. So if we are not careful in how we choose our susceptibility, then we'll end up on planet Mars. And then if we're not careful in our method of transport, we may fly to Mars and have a leg dangling out, as per, if you might have read about the Philadelphia experiment, where as the ship was going through the different energy levels, some sailors didn't actually make it; they got caught in between. So anyway, the point is that there has to be a quality and integrity in the system, and so that implies a responsibility. And it isn't just a devil may care type of thing where, you look at one of the big boons to the medical community, of course, was war, because it gave us an opportunity to practice on broken humans. And they were broken in some of the worst ways. So we got a chance to identify within our capability, what could we save and what could we not save, and to what degree could we repair. And so we see that the way we were doing things was very much the way we repair cars. So, you find, well, you have 2 arms and you have 2 legs, and you step on a landmine and you lose a leg. And so we seem to agree that that is acceptable. And yet the rules of the road say that you have 4 wheels on your car, and if, say, your right front brake is squealing, you don't go to the mechanic who would say to you, well, that right wheel is making an awful lot of noise. I think we're going to have to amputate. At least you still have 3 wheels so you can drive down the road. Well, you wouldn't be able to do that for very long, because I'm sure there'd be some policeman looking at you and saying, that's not according to man-made laws. So we pay more attention to our cars than we do to our bodies. And you can actually see that, especially if you go to a car wash, you will see that people will meticulously wash their cars. as they have trouble bending over and as they cough and have trouble walking. So, you know, our care and compassion is misdirected into our physicality. And so as we become more aware, then our responsibility increases. And that has been something that has been frowned upon socially. And so, you know, we talk about social media. Well, the truth of the matter is it's very anti-social media because it acts as an interface between the social media, and the social media is the gathering of people in places and sharing ideas. Not so much sharing experiences for the sake of gab festing across a fence, a boundary, but the sharing of ideas to learn from the experience of others. And so we need to share those experiences to the benefit of others, not to brag about our deficiencies, but to promote our efficiencies and to contribute to society, and understand that if you are running a business, your business depends on customers, and that those customers are your neighbors. So the welfare of your neighbors is in your best interest. And so when you limit, you say, well, I only care about what's going on in my business and I don't care what's going on in the rest of society. Really? That's, you know, a very limiting viewpoint. So we start to understand not only the ecology of our environment, but we have to understand the ecology of our society and the ecology of our business practices. And so as we go through this revolution, technological revolution, we have to understand that the initial reaction is going to be, everything's fine as long as it's not in my backyard, right? I don't want to have to go through the grief and anguish of having to change my ways. I'm perfectly happy with the way I'm doing things. But in Europe, we've come to an existential crisis. And the horizon is weeks away. And so there's a responsibility. And we normally appoint people to bear that responsibility based on their quality, based on their education, and based on their capability. And if they fail to do the job, then usually they get replaced. And we want to, if they do get replaced, you want them to be replaced with someone who is an improvement. And that's just not the way things are working, because we continue to make things worse. And so we have to identify who benefits and who suffers as a result of it. And so when you depend on undependables, this is what you get. So we need to be independent. And so Joe Muckenfudge now has the capability of being independent. And that brings freedom. But there's a certain kind of freedom. It's not a freedom to abuse. It's a freedom to emancipate one's life and to emancipate the earth. Because the earth is part of the universal community. And so you have to understand that the universal community is hurting in an empathetic way. But according to the universal laws, you cannot intervene in a infringement type manner, as if to, I am going to straighten out my neighbor by blowing a hole in his roof with my cannon. That's not the way the universe works. You see, if I may just give one more example, and I've given this before, you can't play poker in outer space because they don't care what your physical cards are. They can tell from your soul what you're doing. And so every poker player knows, well, that's the fun in the game. And so if you can see my cards, and if you know what I'm holding and you know what my intention is, well, you've just taken all the fun out of the game. So it's not that you can't win playing poker in outer space. The whole business of playing poker is redundant. And, you know, one of the most laughable things that I have seen in the last 2 years is of mask-wearing patrons playing poker during the lockdowns in Las Vegas. Well, how brain dead can you be? We have an existential crisis, and you're there passing time playing poker in a game where there's no friendship, there's no love lost. It's all about winner take all. So where is the product from that? And so what you find is a product of diminishing returns. And that's how we operate. We operate by the law of diminishing returns. And that's the earth space. When you look at the universal community, we have so many opportunities and so much to gain from peace and prosperity.
Thank you, Alex. Okay, so expanding the soul at a distance or mobily is definitely workable. I think when we get to Linz, would we manifest in the physicality by entering the vertical unit and then appearing there in the physicality? I know he said this has to be taught, again, more in the future. And we're going to play the last 6 minutes or so when Mr. Kesh was in the reactor group. And he explains a little bit more. But I'm wondering if there's anything, Mr. Kesh, you'd like to share today. Just wondering, I know you don't come in happenstancely, so to speak. There may be a purpose for you being here, and we want to give you every opportunity to